Welcome once again. My name is Manisha Gutman. I'm here in Pune. I work with a group called the weCoexist Foundation. And for those of you who may not know us yet, we are a social enterprise and a not-for-profit based out of Pune. We have been working for the past 15 years now on issues of sustainability, especially to do with urban lifestyles and consumerism. We also have been leading several campaigns with a focus on products and materials. I'm an architect by training, and therefore we've also been involved in designing alternatives. This particular web series started a few months ago during the lockdown as a way for our wonderful network of friends to share their work with each other. And it slowly grew. And the intention behind Revive was to really help people reconnect. So with each other, but also with themselves, with the communities that they were in, and also to keep our connection to nature alive by these web reflections. Today, I'm really honored because we have an amazing group of people here with us, led by Dr. Edwin Bernbaum, who is talking to us from Berkeley, California. Dr. Bernbaum is a co-chair of the IUCN Specialist Group on Cultural and Spiritual Values of Protected Areas. He's also a senior fellow at the Mountain Institute. He has a deep love for mountains, and he will be sharing his work of the past few decades with us. He has been focusing on the links between culture and environment in particular. He's a scholar of comparative religion and mythology, and also the author of a book called Sacred Mountains of the World. Edwin has been looking at the sanctity attributed to mountains in various cultures and speaking about it. And he's also promoting the link between the religious beliefs or the spiritual beliefs that communities hold that motivate them to actually conserve sacred landscapes. And this is what we're going to be hearing about today. And with him, we have an incredible panel to start with Professor Aditya Purohit. Can we spotlight Ashwini, Shruti? Professor Purohit, namaste, sir, who is a Padma Shri awardee for a lifetime of work. He is a scientist focused on ecophysiology of tree species and high altitude medicinal plants. He has also been the director of the G.B. Pant Institute of Himalayan Development and Environment from 1990 to 1995. There is a whole list of things that I can tell you about Professor Purohit, but he has his own Wikipedia page, and it would be lovely for you to go and look at it. Then we have Professor P.P. Dhyani, who is the Vice Chancellor of Sri Guru Ram Rai University now. He has nearly 40 years of experience in the field of ecophysiology, restoration ecology, and conservation biology. He also has served as director of the G.B. Pant Institute and was awarded the Uttarakhand Ratna Award by the Intellectual Forum of India in May of 2019. Welcome, Dhyani ji. We have with us Abhimanyu Pandey, all the way from Germany, joining us today. Abhimanyu is is pursuing a PhD in anthropology on Trans-Himalayan Studies. And before this, he worked at ICIMOD, the International Center for Integrated Mountain Development, for several years. And he's the author of a book called Kailash Yatra, which we should hear more about later. And lastly, we have Kai Weise from Nepal. Welcome, Kai. Kai is an old friend, and I'm so glad that I've found a way to link him into our work now. He is currently pursuing his PhD in Durham University. He has been a UNESCO consultant and has facilitated the establishment of management systems for World Heritage Sites, such as Kathmandu Valley, Lumbini in Nepal, Samarkand in Uzbekistan, and Bagan in Myanmar. He's also establishing heritage risk assessment guidelines to look at disaster risk management. So this is a really incredible group of people that we have with us today. And I would like to invite Edwin. We also have Edwin's wife, Diane, is with us, although I don't see her. Welcome, Diane. And welcome to both of you, to all of you. With this, I think, Ed, we can start. And you can go ahead and share your screen. The way we structure these talks for all of you, I hope you've had a little bit of dinner before you sat down, at least the ones in India, because it's a 2-hour session. We give the speaker about an hour to present his views. I might interject once in a while, just to clarify. After this, we open it up to the panel, and they have a discussion with the speaker for about 20 to 25 minutes. All along, we will be collecting questions from you, but only in the Q&A section, not on the chat box. We will be collecting questions from you. And in the very last part of the session, for about half an hour, we will open up questions from the audience for the speaker. So do stay with us. It's going to be an amazing journey, along with Edwin, to some great heights, I hope. So with that, Edwin, please go ahead.
Well, thank you very much for the kind introduction, Manisha. I hope that everybody and their friends and relatives are all safe and healthy in this time of pandemic. Right now, where I am in California, you can see very clearly the effects of climate change. We have been under a blanket of smoke for several weeks now and haven't been able to get outside very much. And I think the smoke is now spreading all around the world from the wildfires here on the west coast of the United States. So it's really a serious problem. But I'd like to show you slides that I hope will uplift you and look at ways of using the sacredness of nature to advance environmental and the conservation and preservation, not only of biological diversity, but also cultural diversity. So the talk I'm giving is Conserving Sacred Mountains. And I've reversed the title because it's Mount Kailas and Badrinath. We'll deal with Badrinath, Kailas first. And I must say that 3 of the panelists who are here with me have much more knowledge of both of these places than I do and the projects that I'll be telling you about. And I had the great honor and delight of working with them on these projects that you'll be hearing about. So let me start. This obviously is Nilkant above Badrinath, and we'll get to it. But to get my background, I grew up partly in South America. My father was a diplomat, and so my earliest memories, maybe I was 2 or 3 years old, were of snow-capped peaks on the equator, like this mountain here, Cotopaxi, which is supposedly the highest active volcano in the world, almost 20,000 feet high. Now, I fell in love with snow, and I grew up living in Washington, D.C., partly, where there isn't much snow, but to me there was something magical in the way when snow falls, it transforms the landscape, everything becomes mysterious, very pure, very white. I didn't realize it at the time when I was young, but it was really the spiritual that was attracting me there. And I returned to Ecuador when I was about 15, and I joined up with an Ecuadorian mountaineering club called New Horizons, and I climbed this peak among others. But when I went up to the snow on the equator, I found a world of beauty and fantasy, wind-sculpted glaciers like this one here. In college, I went on and I was at Harvard, and I wound up with the Harvard Mountaineering Club. I went on an expedition to the second highest peak in Alaska called Mount St. Elias. And then one of the things that really appealed to me about going up into the mountains was not only the beauty of the place, but the camaraderie you have with people. You're sharing a deep experience, sometimes things that are risky, and it brings people together and bonds them in really powerful ways. I was drawn to the Himalaya, which of course means the abode of snow. And so I went with Nepal with the American Peace Corps. And after the Peace Corps, I went climbing in the Annapurna range. We were trying to climb this peak here, which is Annapurna South, about 24,000 feet high. And if you'll notice on the left, there's a cloud coming down. This is an avalanche. We were caught in a huge avalanche of hanging glaciers that fell off here, in which I came very close to dying. And it really was a powerful transforming experience. Following the avalanche, I went out to the area around Mount Everest. This is the Monastery of Tangboche. and you see a peak behind just under 20,000 feet called Macherma, which I was able to climb. It was the most difficult climb I've ever done. And I thought we'd made a first ascent. And for 11 years, I had the pleasure of thinking that until I ran into somebody who climbed it before me. But 11 years was a good run. After coming down from this peak, I wound up trekking back to Kathmandu with the Rinpoche or abbot of Tangboche Monastery, whom you see on the left. About 11 days, I was the only Westerner. And this is on a return trip when I came to do research. He'd given me this Tibetan nobleman's robe, which you see here. And I'm looking very much younger. Now, on the way, I was joking with him about Shangri-La, this place that's supposed to be somewhere north of Tibet or northern Tibet. And I told him the story of it just as a joke because his monastery makes people think of Shangri-La. And so he told me of the Tibetan myth of Shambhala, which is a land of great kings and lamas surrounded by snow mountains somewhere north of Tibet, which has a prophecy that in the future, a bodhisattva, a king will come out, there will be a war against the forces of evil, and there'll be a golden age. I was very intrigued. This is a Tibetan painting of Shambhala. I was very intrigued about it, and I wound up writing a book about it. And because of writing the book, in the process of doing the research, I learned there were also hidden sacred valleys in the Himalayas themselves. And I went on the expedition to one. This is one called Kembalung, and you can see the valley in the lower bottom part. I came back to the United States to write a book about this, and I wound up going back to graduate school in Asian studies with an emphasis on comparative religion and mythology. And I did basically an all-day seminar on my first book, The Way to Shambhala, for University of California, Berkeley Extension. And they liked it, so they said, can you give another talk? And I said, well, I could do something on myths and legends of the Himalayas, which I was collecting. And they said, well, can you do something broader? So off the top of my head, I said, why not sacred mountains of the world? And I realized that this topic brought together all sorts of interests I had, intellectual, physical, spiritual, and it was a wonderful topic, so I jumped into it. And I wrote a book after getting my PhD, Sacred Mountains of the World, which you see here with this cover shot of a picture I took of Machu Picchu in Peru. So let's go in. What I'd like to do is look at the idea of sacred mountains around the world. And to begin with, there are all sorts of ways of looking at the sacred. And I would say for our purposes, I would say that mountains as sacred places evoke an experience either of a deeper reality or something of deeper significance that gives meaning and vitality to people's lives. Now, this is a picture of Machu Picchu, and people experience that something of deeper significance, that deeper reality in a sacred place through the views they have of it, and in particular, the views of mountains, because views are extremely important for mountains. So I'm going to use interchangeably the idea of views or themes. And in looking at mountains around the world, I've identified 10 very widespread themes that apply to a wide range of sacred mountains. I don't think there's any one particular reason why mountains are sacred. Some people will say it's because the mountain is a center, but I think that's true of some mountains and not of others. So what I'll do is go through examples of each one. And obviously we look up to mountains as high places, and the highest mountain on earth, of course, at least above sea level, is Mount Everest, which you see here. And because of that, because of its, it represents something of higher value and significance, especially in modern culture, which values whatever is number one. So in a certain secular sense, you might say Mount Everest, for many people in the modern world, is a secular mountain that symbolizes the highest goals you can strive to attain. Now, Everest has several names. In Nepal, it's called Sagarmatha, so the national park is Sagarmatha National Park, which means whose head touches the sky. The Tibetan name is Chomolungma, and this is quite interesting because almost all books until recently about Everest or the Himalayas translate that as Goddess Mother of the Universe or Goddess Mother of the World, which is a way of outsiders, especially Westerners, imposing their views on the local people. Now, Everest doesn't really stand out from many other mountains, and so for the Tibetans and Sherpas, they didn't realize in a sense that it was the highest mountain in the world. And what's more interesting is the name of Everest, more properly in Tibetan, is Jomolungma, And that, what happens in Tibetan, which is a monosyllabic language, is that they shorten names rather than with letters the way we do in acronyms. They do it by taking a few syllables from a longer name. So Jomo Mio Lang Sangma is the name of the goddess, and that shortens down to Jomo Langma, which is the name of the goddess of the mountain. Now in Buddhism, there is no goddess mother of the universe, so that doesn't really fit. And she is a goddess, but she's a relatively minor goddess. You see her portrayed here in the left on a mural at Tangboche Monastery. And she belongs to a lesser category of deities who are appealed to for worldly benefits rather than the higher spiritual benefits. So you appeal to her for long life and wealth, and what she has in her hands are the important things there. Now, another very widespread theme is the theme of the mountain as the center of the universe, the center of the world, or the center of a local area. And the mountain that stands out as an example of this par excellence is Mount Kailas, which you see here. And of course, Kailas has become associated with the highest spiritual attainments of at least 4 or 5 different religions, including Buddhism and Hinduism, the attainment of liberation in Hinduism, moksha, or enlightenment, or bodhi in Buddhism. This is a painting showing the universe, looking straight down on it. It's in a monastery in Bhutan. Right in the center, you're looking straight down on the mountain that Kailas is supposed to be the physical manifestation of, which is Meru or Sumeru. And around it are the looking like orbiting electrons or planets, or actually they represent time. And the continent, Jamudvipa, in which we live, is to the south, down in this area right here. The next one, of course, is that mountains are places of power, both physical power manifesting itself, and the physical can be spiritual. This is lava pouring off of the sacred mountain of Kilauea in Hawaii, going into the ocean. And also mountains are places of political power, like Taishan in China, which has been associated for millennia with the cult of the Emperor of China. Then, of course, mountains are deities, or the abodes of deities. And for many of you who are there in India, this, of course, is the highest mountain in India proper outside of Sikkim, a major sacred mountain, Nanda Devi. And Nanda Devi, of course, is the seat of the goddess Nanda Devi, the bliss goddess or bliss-giving goddess. And here in her temple in Almora, you can see an image of her right there at the center. Now, you often think of mountains as being wild places, but they're also very civilized places. This is a picture of Jerusalem. And Jerusalem in the Bible is basically viewed as a conflation of 2 sacred mountains, Mount Zion and Mount Moriah. And here you can see the 3 religions for which it is sacred: Muslim mosque in the foreground, the Al-Aqsa, Jewish cemetery, and of course the Mount of Olives where Jesus ascended in the end. And so a mountain can be either a temple of a deity, or it can be a temple you go to, or a church where you go to worship. As for example, this Jewish man is worshiping at the Western Wall, the remnants of the original temple in Jerusalem. Now, another widespread theme is the theme of mountains as gardens or earthly paradises. And certainly the Himalaya are depicted that way, especially in the Mahabharata. This is Mount Athos in northern Greece. It's a sacred mountain today for the Greek for the Orthodox, Eastern Orthodox religion, Christianity. And there are 20 Byzantine monasteries. You can see several of them here. It is viewed as the garden of the Mother of God, because the patron of Mount Athos is the Virgin Mary, whom you see here, and that's her peninsula below. Mountains are also extremely important in many cultures as either ancestors or places of the dead. This is Aoraki, the highest mountain in New Zealand, also known as Mount Cook. And for certain of the tribes in the South Island, this mountain is their ancestor. And you can see, for example, an ancestor who came from a mythical paradise called Hawaiki in a canoe. You can see him paddling away in his canoe. And these canoes shipwrecked, and the ancestors went inland and they froze into mountains. And each mountain is the ancestor of a particular Maori tribe. Here, if you go to Japan, this is on Mount Koya, and this has the greatest graveyard in all of Japan. People come and take the ashes of their loved ones and bury them here in this beautiful forest, in this cemetery. Speaking of Japan, of course, mountains are symbols of identity, and no mountain is more clearly seen around the world as a symbol of a place or a nation as Mount Fuji, as you see in this painting. And the beauty and simplicity of the lines of the mountain basically embody the quest for beauty and simplicity that lies at the heart of so much of Japanese culture. In addition, I mentioned earlier that sacred mountains or certain mountains are the ancestors of different Maori tribes. And here, for example, is the paramount chief of the Ngati Tuwharetoa back in the 19th century. I'll just go into this very briefly, but one of the major sacred mountains in New Zealand is Tongariro. And 12 years after the first national park established in the world, Yellowstone in the United States, basically an advisor to the king advised him to give his whole mountain, or actually make an arrangement with the British Crown to joint responsibility for it, to make it into a national park in order to maintain the integrity of the mountain, because people were coming in and buying the lower slopes for grazing sheep. So because of the sacredness of the mountain, it became the first national park in New Zealand and the fourth in the world, only 12 years after Yellowstone. Mountains are extremely important in many parts of the world as sources of water. Water is life. This is the Indus River flowing from its source near Mount Kailas, approaching here the Indian border. And it's also, mountains are sources of blessings of all sorts, for fertility, also medicinal plants. This is a medicinal plant being held in the hand of Professor Purohit when we went to one of his high altitude physiology research stations above Tungnath. Finally, mountains are very important as places of revelation, transformation, renewal, and inspiration. This is Huashan, the most spectacular of the major sacred mountains in China. In order to climb the mountain, you have to go through temples like this along the crest with drops of thousands of feet of granite on each side. And Taoist hermits, traditionally in the past, and some of them still do, go to this mountain in order to transform themselves through meditation into becoming a Xian, or an immortal, one of the goals of the Taoist religion in China. Here in the United States, mountains are extremely important, and this was a very important reason for the birth of much of the environmental movement, especially here in California, with the work of people like John Muir, where mountains, places like the Sierra Nevada and Yosemite Valley in particular, were preserved as places where people could go to for physical and spiritual renewal, which is also extremely important with formal sacred mountains. So here's a famous quote from John Muir, a very well-known American conservationist from the 19th and earlier 20th century. Climb the mountains and get their good tidings. Nature's peace will flow into you as sunshine flows into trees. The winds will blow their own freshness into you, and the storms their energy, while cares will drop off like autumn leaves. So with this preparation, we're going to go to Mount Kailas, which is viewed as the most sacred mountain in the world for maybe up to 1 billion people, followers of 5 religions and traditions. And I'm going to discuss a project that I worked on with Abhimanyu. The project was through ICIMOD to nominate or get the governments of Nepal, India, and China to nominate Mount Kailas and the pilgrimage routes leading to it as a transboundary World Heritage Site. ICIMOD had already been working, when they asked me to consult with them on this, on what they call the Kailas Sacred Landscape, which is about 30,000 square kilometers. You can see it here. And in this map, the national boundaries have deliberately been avoided, so you can see it as a whole without getting national feelings aroused. And of course, up in the top, you can see Lake Manasarovar, the most sacred lake in the world for many, many people, Rakshastal. And here is Mount Kailas, and then the India part and the Nepal part. And we'll see a little later how the nomination, or the proposed nomination, it hasn't happened yet, takes part of this Kailas sacred landscape and makes it what's called a serial nomination. So Mount Kailas is probably everybody in the audience, or almost everybody is familiar with. In Hinduism is one of the primary abodes of Shiva, one of the three forms of the supreme deity, and of course the supreme yogi. And in this poster, you see him meditating in a paradise on top of Mount Kailas. Here you see a Hindu who was with me. He's actually bathing in Lake Manasarovar and facing toward Mount Kailas, which you can see from the lake, offering water to Shiva on the summit. For Buddhists, or Tibetan Buddhists in particular, Mount Kailas is the abode of a different deity called Demchok, or in Sanskrit, Chakrasamvara. And here he is embracing his consort, who's red, symbolizing the union of compassion and wisdom when they come together and are seen to be one and the same, awakening those forces within each one of us. There's a feeling of bliss, like the bliss of sexual union, which allows you to attain enlightenment for the benefit of everyone else. And here is a Tibetan woman who has just completed what's called the Kora, or the sacred circumambulation of Mount Kailas. And you can see people come here for the spiritual experience of a lifetime, and it shows on their faces. Now, Kailas, as we mentioned earlier, is also viewed, and these are recent developments, but very, very powerful, as the physical manifestation of Mount Sumeru, or Meru, which is the central axis of the cosmos. And here you see another painting of it, where the mountain is coming up and spreading out like a lotus blossom, the palace of Indra, the king of the gods, and then above these bars are clouds representing stages of trance and meditation. In our world, where we live, is to the south, Jamudvipa. Now, the second time I went out to Kailas, we came up the Tsangpo River Valley, we came over a pass and got our first view from the Marium La of Kailas, and to our amazement, the clouds fit the pattern of this painting. Here's Kailas, and you can see the layers of clouds, almost like layers of trance above the mountain. So I'm going to go very quickly to give you a sense of the Kora. And I should point out that these pictures I took back in 1988 and 1991, 92. And things have changed a great deal in Kailas and what's there. Abhimanyu will be able to tell us about that in the discussion. So most people, the circuit around Kailas is about 50 kilometers. We took 2.5 days. You start at about 15,000 feet and you go over the Droma La at about 18,500 feet. But you pass Tibetans who are going in 3 weeks around the mountain doing full-length body prostrations like these people here. Some of them come with the minimal equipment. For example, this man walking barefoot on the snow and ice higher up on the mountain. As you go around the mountain, it presents its different faces. This is the north face of Mount Kailas, associated with Shivaji in particular. And I'm going to, Milarepa, who is Tibet's most famous yogi, came here and had a miracle contest to see whether his religion, Buddhism, or the indigenous religion of Bon would prevail here. But he spent quite a bit of time meditating, and this in his songs is what he had to say of Mount Kailas. The prophecy of Buddha says most truly that this snow mountain is the center of the world. There is no place more wonderful than this. There is no place more marvelous than here. The high point of the pilgrimage, of course, is the Droma La, the pace of the saviors.
Ed, Ed, can I say, can I please request you to slow down a little bit?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I'm sorry.
It's so beautiful. I think it just, if you slowed down a little bit, it would be nicer. Yeah.
Okay, you mean to see the pictures, or am I speaking too quickly?
And the quotations, it's nice to be able to read it.
All right, good. Okay, so I will slow down. So this is the Pass of the Saviors, the Pass of Tara. And you can see it's festooned with Tibetan prayer flags. And this woman, pilgrim here, each Tibetan pilgrim will take a part of themselves, such as a lock of hair, an old tooth, and they'll put it here on this rock, symbolizing that they're relinquishing attachments to their own ego in order to attain enlightenment or merit for the sake of everyone else, which is the ultimate goal, especially of Tibetan Buddhism. Now that we've gone around and seen the various ways in which Kailas is sacred, when I was brought on to sort of help try to guide Isimod through the process of getting Kailas and the pilgrimage routes to it nominated as a World Heritage Site, one of the very important things in a World Heritage nomination is you've got to do a comparative analysis and compare your site, which you're proposing, to existing sites to make sure that it's unusual and has certain unique characteristics. So I've taken the 10 major themes that we looked at. Remember, we started, this is the mountain, this is height, center, power, deity, all 10 of these. And here I've taken well-known mountains, each one of which is in an existing World Heritage Site, like Mount Everest is in Sagarmatha National Park, Nanda Devi is in its national park. These are down in Japan. And I put a check mark, yes. Yes?
Can you just walk us through these criteria a little slower?
Okay,
the 10 criteria.
So the first one is the height. So the place is the high place, and we used Everest as an example of that. And the check marks show whether each of these mountains is sacred because of that particular theme, whether it's viewed in that way. So Everest is obviously a high place. Taishan is, other of these mountains are for different reasons. Now, for example, power is usually associated with a deity. Almost everyone has a deity, so they're check marks. A temple or place of worship, you can see the check marks going there, identity, source, and then revelation. I don't want to linger on this too long. The reason I show this is if you look at Kailas at the bottom, it has more check marks than almost any other mountain that's here. And that makes it really a prime candidate, given the fact that it's important to almost 1 billion people, followers of 5 religions, people from many different countries. It's an ideal World Heritage Site. Unfortunately, it hasn't been nominated as a World Heritage Site. So let's go on and look at some of the characteristics. So first of all, World Heritage. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, the key concept in World Heritage is what's called outstanding universal value. And this is what it is according to UNESCO. Cultural and/or natural significance that is so exceptional as to transcend national boundaries and be of common importance for present and future generations of all humanity. Now, this is key to a nomination. Everything depends on the site having this outstanding universal value, and that it also has a management plan in place, a system actually, which will preserve this outstanding universal value. So let me read it. Outstanding universal value is the main focus of a World Heritage nomination. What is evaluated? Because a site is originally evaluated either as a natural site or a cultural site by 2 different organizations. The IUCN, which I co-chair a group in, does the natural nominations. The cultural ones are done by an organization based in Rome called ICOMOS. And then there are certain sites that are both cultural and natural. And obviously, Kailas fits right in there. So this OUV is why a property is inscribed as a World Heritage Site and what needs to be sustained through protection, conservation, and management. So the main reason for trying to get Kailas nominated as a World Heritage Site is to put in place safeguards to preserve the cultural and natural integrity and authenticity of the place so that it doesn't get swept away by tourism. And this is a very tricky proposition that I'm sure Kai in particular will talk about at the end, because of course, when a site is inscribed in World Heritage, it gets international attention and immediately attracts lots and lots of people who can overwhelm the place and destroy its natural environment and also the culture that's there. That's why it's extremely important that there be a really strong management system in place to deal with that. So let's take a look. This is a Tibetan painting of Kailas, and you see the mountain here. And above you see Milarepa, Tibetan yogi I mentioned, and also a priest of the indigenous religion Narobunchon. And one of the most famous Tibetan stories is a race to the top of Kailas. And the story is that Milarepa came to meditate here, and the Bonpo, whose name is Naro Bonchen, said basically, you know, this is my territory, you'll have to convert to my religion. And Milarepa said, well, I can't do that. So they had a contest to see who would prevail and who could meditate there. And it culminated with a race to the summit. And the agreement was that at dawn, they would have a race to see who got there first. Then at dawn or just before dawn, the Bonpo priest took off on his drum, flying on his drum. And that's a symbol, actually, when you beat on the drum in shamanism, you ride the drum and go up to high heights of spiritual trance. So he was approaching the summit. Milarepa overslept, and his disciples said, you've lost the race. And he said, don't worry. And he did a mudra, a gesture, which effectively stopped Naro so he could only circle around at about this altitude. And then Milarepa snapped his fingers and went instantly to the summit of Mount Kailas. And poor old Naro was so amazed by it that he fell off his drum, and there's a major gully that comes down the face of the mountain, which according to Buddhist tradition was gouged out by Naro and his drum. According to Hindu tradition, it's the stairway to the heaven of Shiva on the summit. So one of the things I should point out is that one of the advantages of a natural sacred site, and that's what we focus on in the group that the CSVPA, the group that I co-chair, is that, for example, in Jerusalem, you have at least 3 religions, Islam, Christianity, and Judaism, and there are physical structures that have been put on the site. So in order to rebuild the temple and make it a truly Jewish site, the Muslim mosque has to be removed, and there's a lot of conflict that results from this kind of thing, where basically you've imposed your view on the mountain with a physical structure. But if it's a natural structure where the features are interpreted in different ways, there's much less need for any conflict. So natural sacred sites, I think, have a great future as places promoting cooperation and peace. So there are other features in the Kailas Manasarovar area, the most important of which is Lake Manasarovar, which you see here at almost 15,000 feet, one of the highest freshwater lakes in the world, and very, very sacred. When I went out there, I had the privilege of actually walking on sacred water. Now, if you wonder how that happened, the first time I went there, it was October, and as you can see, it was frozen out for about 100 feet, so you could walk on the water, literally, on the ice. Many pilgrims who come will do the Kora, or circumambulation of the lake, which we weren't able to do, but Abhimanyu, I think, has done it himself, perhaps in a bus. And this is a famous quote from the Skanda Purana about the importance of not only Himachal, Himalaya, but also the lake. In the space of, and I'll expand on this, in the space of 100 ages of the gods, I could not describe to you the glories of Himachal, another name for Himalaya. As the dew is dried up by the sun, so are the sins of humankind by the sight of Himachal. There are no other mountains like Himachal, for there are found Mount Kailas and Lake Manasarovar. So there are various traditional pilgrimage routes to Mount Kailas, and these are a few of the major ones. This is the one coming up on the left from India. It crosses over the Lipulek Pass and then joins the path coming from Nepal through Humla and over the path here. And then you get to Kailas and the lake and the mountain. This is the way we came, coming from the west. There are also routes that are coming in from this direction. So we're going to look briefly at some of the features along the pilgrimage routes coming over the mountains from Nepal and from India. This is from the Nepal side, the sacred mountain above the town of Simikot. And I went up to Simikot with Abhimanyu, whom you see here at the Nepalganj airport. And we were flying up, actually it was the day after the big earthquake in 2015. We had no way of getting back to Kathmandu. Communications and airs were cut off, but we were able to go up to Simikot. So we flew up from Nepalganj to Simikot. This is the fortress that makes it its name, Simikot. And one of the things we did there was to interview a Dami or a Janki. This is a shaman whom you see here. And the deity that he invokes is Kalashita, which means literally black snot. And what happened was he began to shake at a certain age. He told us his story. And then black snot started coming out of his nose. And they said, well, you're the medium for Kalashita, this particular deity. Now, he had been, before the borders were closed earlier, and then later on, the shamans also go up there, and sort of the even older religion tradition, you might say, that even Hinduism and Buddhism in this area. And for him, what was more important than Mount Kailas was the lake. He went and circumambulated Mount Kailas 3 times, but he circumambulated and bathed in Lake Manasarovar 26 times. We came back after being at Simikot, and this is the destruction in downtown Kathmandu after the quake, which of course a lot of you are familiar with. We felt the shaking in Western Nepal, but we were far from the epicenter, so there was no damage where we were. Now, this is a continuation of the route going to the Tibetan border, and these are some pictures by Abhimanyu, who will talk a bit about this during the discussion. So here we're passing a Chorten on the way, and this was a cave, a very sacred site near a gomba or a monastery, which shows Guru Rinpoche or Padmasambhava in the center, who was sort of the second Buddha who is said to have brought Buddhism to much of the Himalayan area in Tibet around the 8th century. There's also a major pilgrimage route coming up from India, in fact, a whole web of them, but the main one near the beginning is the Narayan Ashram that was established pretty recently in 1936 because the founder of it went into a trance here and meditated. So a lot of people stop at this place. There are many villages and places along the way, and one of the purposes of the nomination is also to provide livelihoods for people, because younger people are leaving this area, and especially the area around Kailas and Lake Manasarovar, because there's no future for them. But with proper management, there can be many roles for them, and of course their culture needs to be protected, and they need to be very much involved in whether or not they want the nomination and how they would like it to be implemented. So here is the part of the pilgrimage route, which going along a river, I think this is on the border between Nepal on the right and India on the left, which has led to certain disputes, which I won't get into here. When you get up higher, there are sacred meadows called bugyals, and these are very important. Goats and such are allowed to graze there for part of the year, and then the rest of the year they're off limits, completely sacred. And this way, the meadows are allowed to regenerate, so it's very beneficial for the environment. Not too far from the border is Adi Kailas or Chota Kailas, and named for Mount Kailas in Tibet. And many pilgrims will go to this mountain if they can't go to Kailas and try to circumambulate it as a substitute, so to speak, for Mount Kailas. And there are a number of mountains that bear this name of Kailas, not only the one in Tibet. So all of these sites would be very important. And the nomination, since it would be almost impossible to have a management plan covering 30,000 square miles, the idea would be to have corridors following the pilgrimage routes with certain sites highlighted along the way, and these could then be manageable within a management system. So this is what's called a serial nomination. So there's a lot more to say, but let me point out, you're wondering maybe, why is this a transboundary World Heritage nomination? This obviously creates all sorts of problems, because you have to have 3 countries who are often, at odds with each other working together. Now, there's a very simple reason why this should be done, and it shouldn't be just Mount Kailas and Lake Manasarovar in Tibet. The reason is this, that UNESCO has a requirement that each country has a quota of only 1 or 2 nominations they can make a year. World Heritage is very important in China, and there is a long, long queue of places that are already lined up for nomination. So if you try to just nominate Kailas and Lake Manasarovar, it could be 50 to 100 years from the time when it would actually come to the top of the list. It isn't even on the list there. On the other hand, if it's a transboundary nomination, it can be on the quota of only one of those three countries. Nepal, and Kai can speak to this, has had very few nominations. Kailas is extremely important to India, so the Indian government could move it up to place. So this would basically allow the site to be nominated as a transboundary site, including the pilgrimage routes, many, many years before otherwise. The other thing is that a transboundary nomination could help to promote peaceful cooperation and improve relations among the three countries. If, for example, China worked with India to do it, since Kailas is so important to hundreds of millions of Hindus in India, this could go a long way to improving relations. At this point, there hasn't been much progress, but there's always the hope that this would happen. And certainly the idea is there. And we had meetings with officials, people, governments, workshops, one of which was held at Dr. Diani's, when Dr. Diani was director of the G.B. Pant Institute at their headquarters near Almora, another one in Dehradun that Professor Purohit was at. And so we also had ones in China and in Nepal with the ambassador of Nepal and government, ambassador of India to Nepal and officials in Nepal. So the idea is there, and hopefully in the future something will be made of it. So let's shift now to Badrinath. And for those who haven't been there, this is an overall view of Badrinath in the center and the peak and the project, which is a Badrinath tree planting project called Badrivan, establishing the sacred forest of Badrivan, Van being meaning, of course, forest. Above Badrinath is the sacred mountain of Nilkant, which you see here. This is a picture I took of it at dawn. And when I showed this picture to my son, David, he looked at it and he said, well, first of all, I composed it because the valley sort of reflects, as you can see, the shape of the mountain very nicely. And my son looked at it and he said, well, you know, this is the shape of India. And in fact, it is, if you look at it. Now, Nilkant means blue neck, and it refers to a very well-known myth in Hindu tradition, which is the churning of the ocean, in which the devas, or the gods, the gods here on the left, on the right rather, got together with the asuras, or the anti-gods, and they churned the ocean to extract the nectar of immortality and everything else. On the way, they extracted this poison that was going to kill the world, and so Shiva stepped in and drank it, and his neck turned blue, so therefore Nilkant, or blue neck. So this is the shrine of Badrinath, which is the principal Hindu pilgrimage place in the Indian Himalaya. It's one of the four major pilgrimage places in India of the four directions. This is the one at the northern direction. It's also in another group of pilgrimage places we won't go into, which include Gangotri and Kedarnath and Yamnotri, which are all in this area. So this is a picture I took of Professor Purohit a number of years ago. We met at a conference on mountains in Lima, Peru. We hit it off, and he invited me to come up and see and study a project which he had initiated with Dr. Diani, which was to restore the ancient sacred forest of Badrinath. And what happened is Dr. Purohit at that time went up there, and Badrinath is about 10,000 feet, no trees. There had been a forest there, but it had been cut down in part because of the advent of tourism. Once the Indian government built roads into there, instead of walking 20 days through the mountains to get to Badrinath, you could drive up on roads. So now in a short span of three months in the summer, you get about 300,000 or 400,000, maybe more pilgrims coming, and they've had an impact. So he had the idea of going to see the chief priest, or Rawal, whom you see here. And this is the Rawal whom I interviewed later. He comes from a Brahmin family from Kerala. Traditionally, H. Rawal comes there because that was the birthplace of Shankaracharya, who also established this as a sacred site many, many years ago. Now, he went to the priest and he said, trees had been planted, but nobody took care of them. The army had tried it, nothing had succeeded. And he said, he went to him and he said, if you're interested in this, we could do a joint project. to where the scientists would bring up tree saplings and you could bless them and plant them. And Rawa was especially interested. He thought trees were extremely important for various reasons, including the fact that they regenerate oxygen or prana, which is very important in meditation. So they initiated a series of tree planting ceremonies, and they drew on very well-known stories in Hinduism, beginning with the one of the descent of the Ganga. And this, you can see the Ganga, the Ganges. Her face is on top of Shiva's hair. And of course, many of you are familiar with this story, or this myth, very important myth. And by myth, by the way, I don't talk about something that's false or just a story. It's a very deep idea that underlies people's conceptions of reality, extremely important. But I won't go into that here. In any case, you see the water spouting out of her mouth. And the story is that the sage Bhagirath wanted the Ganges to come down from heaven to fill up the oceans. She liked it up in heaven and didn't want to come down. So as an excuse, she said, if I fall to the earth, the weight of my waters will shatter the earth. Shiva stepped in and said, I'll break the fall of your waters. So that's what happens. So she comes down. Now, Indian environmentalists have pointed out that this myth actually corresponds to what goes on, because according to the Puranas, the trees in the Himalaya can be viewed as Shiva's hair. And when that hair, the tree, is no longer there to break the fall of the water, when the trees are cut down, during the summer, the Ganges falls in the form of monsoon rains, and there are floods and landslides and devastation. The earth literally shatters under impact. So one of the things that could be done is that when the pilgrims come, the priest was very interested in saying, well, you're getting blessings from Lord Shiva and also Lord Vishnu, and you will get more blessings if you don't cut down trees, and you get even more if you plant them to restore Shiva's hair. Now, in fact, Badrinath itself is directly connected with a sacred tree. This is Vishnu and Lakshmi. And the story is that Narada convinced Vishnu that he should come up to Badrinath and meditate. His wife wasn't very happy about this, but she said, okay. So he went up to meditate, and it started to snow. So she took the form of a badri, or a juniper tree, and sheltered him from the snow. And then when he realized that it was his wife, he said that was a good idea. And Badrinath can be interpreted as the Lord of Juniper, Badrinath. So when I came up there at Professor Purohit's invitation, there was a tree planting ceremony just down the valley at a place called Hanuman Chatti. And here you can see some of the speakers. This is Dr. Purohit, Dr. Palni, who at that time was the director of the G.B. Pun Institute. And we'll see this gentleman a little later. This, I think, is Dr. Diani. And there was a whole crowd. And I spoke with them. And I've spoken in a number of groups, but I've never spoken as an interesting group of speakers, much more interesting than me. So, for example, we had there this Naga Baba, whom you see here, whose full name is Sri Sri Ekhajar At Sri Naga Baba Hanuman Giri. And he is a very important Naga Baba, goes around completely naked except for a penis ring. And his arm is frozen up in place because of basically holding it up for 3 years, and now it's frozen in place. So they brought him in to bless the trees, and here Dr. Diani is holding a sapling being blessed by the Naga Baba. And then we had a number of other people. There was the shrine priest who spoke, the scientists, including Professor Purohit, Dr. Diani, Dr. Palni, the Brigadier General, whom we'll see in a moment, the Swami, quite a group of people. And I gave a very minor talk because I thought I was just taking pictures, but I was dragooned into giving a talk as well. So this was the Brigadier who was in charge of India's border forces with Tibet. And this is Brigadier Dalveer Singh. And the reason he came was that he'd heard that the Naga Baba had gone up to 15,000 feet in winter. Everybody leaves. And he just sat there in the all together and let the snow pile up around him as he was meditating. A military scouting patrol was going around in the snow, and they saw the Naga Baba's trident sticking out of the snow. They dug down and found him meditating happily away. So the Brigadier thought, you know, that is somebody worth getting darshan from. So he came and he also spoke. He's very interested, and his troops were also interested in planting and taking care of the trees. And he brought along a band. So you see the band here with their kilts turbans, and bagpipes. I went and interviewed afterwards all the different players, beginning with the Laga Baba, whom you see here. Incidentally, various well-known people like the late Prime Minister Indira Gandhi had come to him for blessings, and we'll go on from there. There was a tree planting ceremony, as I said, and this is a very important Swami. This is Sri Sri Tridandi Sriman Narayan Ramunaja J.R. Swamiji. He's the leader of a major religious order in Andhra Pradesh in southern India. And he'd come for the ceremony, and he was very interested in this whole idea and taking the idea back to have people plant trees in their communities, especially to plant the trees when they planted the placentally umbilical cords of their children. And there were a lot of local villagers like this woman here who was planting, as well as various sadhus like this one here. And a lot of the sadhu community was very excited by this whole idea. So the idea was to plant the trees, get the enthusiasm for planting them, and then even more important, since the trees have been blessed and a sacred forest is being restored, then people would take care of them. Because the problem with reforestation in many parts of India is a lot of trees are planted, but then nobody takes care of them. The cows eat them, the goats eat them, and they're gone. As someone has said, if all the trees that have been planted in India were there, you couldn't walk anywhere because you'd be jam-packed. But of course, there aren't that many trees that have survived. So that's one of the things to see. And each area then becomes part of Badrivan. So this is Hanuman Van, because Hanuman Chati is dedicated to Hanuman. Now this brings up something quite interesting, which is many of the pilgrims who come to revere or get blessings from the three major deities, generally Shiva or Vishnu. But for the local people, for them, what's much more important are, for example, local deities, in particular, the 5 Pandavas, whom you see here. And in the case of Hanuman Chati, the site is there because in the Mahabharata, the 5 Pandavas, because Yudhishthira loses a gambling match, they have to go into exile in the Himalayas. So they came up here, and one of the Pandavas, Bhima, wanted to get a flower up near Badrinath for their common wife, Draupadi, whom you see here. But Hanuman was lying on the trail with a big tail, and he wouldn't let him go by until he paid homage to Hanuman. So that's one of the reasons you have the shrine at Hanuman Chati. Now, one of the problems at the first planting was that the saplings weren't able to survive the winter. So the G.B. Pun Institute, under the direction at the time of this project, Dr. Diani, who was put in charge of it, you see him here, they established a nursery in order to harden the saplings for altitude so they could survive the winters, and they also built structures to protect them from sliding snow. I went around and I talked to the various players, as I say here in the study. So this is a panda, and there are all these families of pandas. Each panda is responsible for pilgrims who come from a particular part of India, and they have records of these people, which you can see here. So they take care of them when they come. And we were looking at the possibilities. People are coming to this place, so they're primed for looking to see what are religious reasons, and you've seen some of them, why trees are important and should be planted, not just at Badrinath, but throughout the country of India. So it's a place where these ideas can basically spread out over a whole subcontinent and nation. This is another Swami, Mangalananda, who was very excited by the project, and he was planting trees in his particular dharamsala, a very important dharamsala at Badrinath, and encouraging the planting of trees in other places, Gangoti and elsewhere. What was very interesting was some of the people who are the most involved in the tree planting project were the village women for various reasons. One is the women have to go out and take care of cows, and they like to get the leaves for fodder and have places where cows can sleep under trees, so they're protected from the sun. In addition, speaking to this woman in particular, they're also very concerned about the beauty and restoring the beauty of the area with the trees. Now the project is spread beyond Hinduism. So there's Khalsa Van, which is involving the Sikhs, and in particular there's a Valley of the Flowers, which is very important for the Sikh religion very close by. So there have been tree planting ceremonies conducted there. And you can see the sign of this regiment. And the military has been involved as well. Now, after doing this project, this was in 1998, I think. I was there in 96, perhaps. I thought, wow, that's a really interesting idea. And not too long after that, I was a senior fellow at the time at the Mountain Institute, and we did basically a seminar on sacred mountains and environmental conservation. And we sent out a report on this, and it went to a particular foundation in New York called the Nathan Cummings Foundation. And they said, this is a great idea. We'd love to do something along these lines, but here in the United States. So thinking of Badrinath, I thought, well, we have the equivalent of many Badrinaths here in the United States. They're called national parks. And in a sense, they're national shrines that people come to not only from all over the US, but all over the world. And there we have an opportunity to convey environmental messages that are based on basically the cultural and spiritual meanings and associations of different features of nature. So with this, I started a project called the Sacred Mountains Program at the Mountain Institute, and we worked with US national parks. So here, for example, are 3 parks that we work with: Mount Rainier National Park, a traveling exhibit. This is a wayside sign at Santa Monica Mountains. We did a trail with Cherokee ideas, the Cherokee Indians along a trail, linking nature to their traditions. And then this was an exhibit at Yosemite National Park of all the major national parks around the theme of the spiritual value of wilderness and the environment. And this, to give you an idea, is the project was to develop interpretive materials and educational materials and activities which are based on the evocative, inspirational meanings and associations of different natural features ranging from mountains to trees to eagles to wildlife and so on in mainstream American, Native Hawaiian, and other cultures around the world. And the National Park Service got very interested in this because they saw it, among other ways, as a way of connecting people to nature so they'd be connected with it, enrich their experience, not just give information, and also a way to involve so-called minorities in the US, like African Americans, Latinos, who haven't been going to national parks in large numbers, to get them interested by looking at what mountains and features mean in their heritages and traditions, because this is very important for the future of the Park Service. So with that, what I'd like to do is turn it over to the panel and look at, among other things in discussion, the implications of these projects at Badrinath and Mount Kailas, with the first example being what we did with national parks in the United States. And I'd like to thank everyone for their patience in listening to this talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. That was really a wonderful presentation. And I'm so glad that we were actually able to see everyone on the panel in your presentation. It really feels like the whole team has been part of this journey. So it's wonderful to have all of them here. It's really an honor. So I'd like to invite anyone on the panel to take this discussion forward. Professor Purohit, why don't you start?
Okay. Well, thank you, Edwin, reminding us our old work and other things. But my comments will stand nowhere before your such a nice presentation and illustration. I would like to make it very clear that I am not an environmentalist. I'm a plant scientist and a teacher. And that's how I started my career. I was lucky enough to have a fellow and a student like Dr. Dhyani, who hails from Devprayag but works in Badrinath too. Now, maybe that I have missed it to inform Edwin about the genesis of our Badrinath work. We had a very eminent, very thoughtful bureaucrat in Uttarakhand. That time it was Uttar Pradesh, Hill Secretary, late Dr. R.S. Thodia. He was about 4 or 5 years junior to me in the college. So he visited me when I was in Almora as the director of the institute, and he talked to me about the condition of Badrinath, soil erosion and many things. And he said that, can we think about the rejuvenation of that area through this institution? Believe or not, till then I had no idea what is rejuvenation.
Yeah.
But I was certainly interested in it. And that is the time when Dr. Dhyani joined us as a staff member in the institute. So I talked to Dhyani that what is this word Badrinath has started. And he told me the story that it is a dense area of juniper, which is called Badriban. That gave me indication that there was a forest there. And that's why I told Dhyani that let's think over it and rejuvenate Badriban. And the name started from there.
Mm-hmm.
But to plant the juniper plant, it's a bush basically, altitude bush. It takes very long time, germination and other things. But I have been working on the high altitude plants at Tungnath earlier. So I said that we will modify it, but the thing that how the people will be motivated here. Let me add one more thing about me here, that I am not a religious man. Certainly I am a spiritual, but not religious. So I never believed in those things. So I told Dhyani that, look, who can motivate the people to work on this plantation program? Institute itself with the 10 to 20 people at that time cannot go for the whole program. He said, sir, what we will do that we will first meet the main priest, which we call, with Edwin told, Raval, who hails from Kerala. If he gives permission and gives a talk to the people, then maybe that will be successful. And in the meantime, another bureaucrat joined Ministry of Environment, Mr. Rajamani. He was Secretary in Environment. So when I talked to him that we intend to start this program, can you also join us? A little bit religious-minded man, Rajamani. He said, oh, nothing like that. I will be the first man to come. So we had two bureaucrats with us, and Dr. Dhyani could manage to fix a meeting with the Raval, which is otherwise very difficult. Although he stays in the temple, but very few people can meet him in his own private chamber. So we fixed the timing. We met Raval. When we talked, he was convinced. I said, but you have to do one thing, that usually Raval, when he performs puja in Badrinath, nobody can touch him. He gives from a distance and people have to hold it. But not even a single petal of those flowers or leaves are thrown out. People take it with them even to their house right in the south also. That is the sanctity which is given to that. The offering by Raval through this, which is a religious point of view. So I said that what we have to request you to distribute those plants with your hands to the devotees who visit temple on that day. He was a little bit hesitant first because once he's in puja, he doesn't come out and he's not allowed to touch others. That's a tradition. So Dhyani and me, both of us, we could persuade him. He said, okay, I'll do it. But I'll come to the first topmost stair of the temple. You bring the pots or the bags of the plants. I will touch it and give it to the devotees. If they come one by one, that will take care of it. So Mr. Radhamani was the first person to get the plant. From there to the plantation site, it was 3 kilometers walk. So all of them, believe or not, without any hesitation, agreed, yes, it's a prasadi given by Rawal Saab, we will go and plant it itself. So about 2,000 or odd number pilgrims, they took part in the first dates. Luckily, my wife was also there on that day. And that gave a moral boost in the whole community there itself. And Raval said, any plant for this program, if you bring it here, I will give touch myself and offer it. Religiously, they motivated the people like anything. I'm very happy to inform you, after that, when Dr. Dhyani took a lead, he motivated the army people. And today's success, if somebody goes there, I have heard, I have not visited after very long, since 96 I have not been. But people have told that the army, they have done wonders. The tree line, of course, goes up there, but up to 10,000 trees grow very slowly. That's a phenomenon of the partial pressure things. But the way they have taken care of it, it has become a part of forest up to Mana village by them, because that is the last village.
Are there some photographs of before and after or something like that? Ed, have you seen anything like that?
I think Dr. Dhyani must be having it, definitely. And the institute, of course, it has the archives. They will have it. But
Yes.
we can just definitely share those things. But the thing is, seeing is believing. It's a great success. Through making use of the spirituality and the religion both in rejuvenation of those areas which had basically become barren. I have been to Badrinath earlier also.
And what was the cause of it becoming barren? Are these trees being cut for some purpose?
No. I don't believe in that. It's not cut because the erosion and avalanche movement are very regular in that area. Now, that is possible to control it through making bunds on the top on the Georges. I was told that army people have done nicely because they were told that if you stop it, erosion from this side, then the plants will survive. So they have been able to do it because that remedy that has to be done by that. But many people have advocated that is a deforestation done for cutting the trees and other things in those valleys, Kedarnath and Badrinath. The question doesn't arise. It was not done there because the plant regeneration is very slow, seed setting is very slow. So once you put a plant which grow up to that height, then it takes longer time for the seed setting. And regeneration now, hardly 10 to 20% seeds will generate in the seedlings, rest will not. So obviously it is slow, but it needs a continuous care. Luckily, I'll take last sentence. The way army is taken care of, that's why yesterday you and I were talking it, that I find that if there is a spirituality which exists, that is our armed men, armed people, who are on those areas settled if they are motivated. They can really do wonders through the technology, little bit, scientific input, that what species are required to be planted, which will grow faster, which will go, and what is the depth they have to go in the soil. That is what can be done, and it is being done, probably. Thank you. This is what, and the rest of the thing which Edwin has seen, that that gives away a moral boost. Next time when he goes, he must see the achievements of the army there. Thank you.
Yes. Well, thank you very much. No, and I think Professor Purohit is a bit too humble. He has an extraordinary number of great ideas on how to, basically bring together science and religion and spiritual and cultural values in this. And we had wonderful conversations. And I also had a wonderful time with Dr. Diani working on this project. We worked very closely when I was there, going around to the various sites.
Dr. Diani, would you like to say something? Yeah.
Yes, namaste.
Namaste.
First of all, I extend my thanks to Dr. Edwin, the ambassador of Badrinath Restoration Program, for providing me this unique opportunity of participation. Ladies and gentlemen, I am also very thankful to my reverend teacher, Professor Purohit, who inspired me to execute Badrinath Restoration Program at Badrinath in 1993. In a nutshell, I would like to share my views that this program was initiated in September 1993 and was successfully concluded in November 2001. And the main objective of this program at the time was to revive the Badrinath. Badrinath, the ancient sacred forest of Badrinath Shrine. As you know, and Dr. Edwin highlighted, that Badrinath is out of the 4 major Hindu shrines in India, and it is a place of pilgrimage for centuries. And at present, almost 15 to 20 lakh pilgrims visit Badrinath each year. The Badrinath, basically, when we analyzed at that time the Bhagavad Purana, a Hindu epic, it is mentioned that the Badrinath valley was fully dominated by the Badri tree, which we call Juniperus macropoda, and Badrifal, which we call Hippopis salicifolia. When Adiguru Shankaracharya visited Badrinath shrine around 815 AD, based on the dominance of these 2 trees or shrubs, he named the forest of that valley Badrinath and the area as Badrinath. But due to a variety of reasons, the valley at that time was devoid of trees. Although many plantation programs were carried out by diverse stakeholders after 1962, but before 1993, not a single sapling survived in Badrinath Valley due to a number of reasons, that may be incorrect selection of species, non-hardening of species, protection measures during winter season when the Badrinath Valley remains closed for almost 6 months and experiences more than 30 feet snow. So many reasons were there. But that time when Professor Purohit instructed me and guided me that how you can blend the science and religion and how we can revive that ancient sacred forest in Badrinath. Then he proposed that the environment should be considered as wisdom and development action. So wisdom-based action inculcated a spirit among us that if the chief priest, who hails from the generation of Adiguru Shankaracharya, will utilize his spiritual authority and will provide a sapling to the pilgrims, they will have sentimental attachment to the sapling and they will make plantation. After this, we tested this philosophy by organizing many ritual distribution plant ceremonies. In between 1993 to 2001, almost 16 ceremonies were organized, and one ceremony was witnessed by Dr. Edwin Bernbaum in September 1996. Subsequently, ensuring the spiritual values, we scientifically screened the plant species of that area, and then based on energy budget of the plants, we recommended 5 broad-leaved species, which we call in the local Bhojpatra, Karshu, Jamun, Chan, and Akhut, and 5 narrow-leaved tree shrub species or tree species, Juniperus macropoda, which we call Badri, Kel, Thuner, Kathala, and Raga. And I am very happy to share with the distinguished audience that as on the date of completion of this program, almost 22,000 trees survived well in the whole Badrinath Valley. It was well documented. And before the execution of this program, not more than 100 trees were growing in Badrinath Valley, which is a 4 kilometer in length and 1.5 kilometer in width. So, in nutshell, what it considered by the others. The first thing, this model, by way of execution and demonstration, reversed the opinion of the diverse stakeholders, because all the plantations done earlier were not successful. Then this model emerged as an inspiring model of integration of sacred and scientific values, and was internationally cited as a model for reforestation of sacred places all over the world. And I'm very happy to share that the approach of this program was included in IUCN guidelines for planning and managing mountain protected. And this model was identified as a success stories from the globe during International Year of Forests. After the,
I'm so sorry, but
just 1 minute. After this program, this was replicated in 5 states of the Indian Himalayan region. We replicated this model in J&K and established a Siachen reforestation model at Siachen Base Camp. In Himachal, Mahadev Ban in Pudang village in Simla. In Assam, Kamakhya Ban in Abhaipur in Guwahati. And in Uttarakhand, 5 models were created: Khalsa Ban at Gobind Ghat, Hanuman Ban at Hanuman Chetty, Raksha Ban at Mana, Kalika Ban at Lohagat, and Nandavan at Almora. So, at present now we are advocating that all the religious places in India should also act as motivating center for creating environmental awareness among the masses. And for this purpose, the idea which we are giving, that the distribution of seed packets with the prasada, so that the pilgrims could sow the seeds and grow plants. So with these words, thank you very much for the organizer for giving me this opportunity of sharing my views among the district.
Thank you, Dhyani sir. I think if we could just have Abhimanyu and Kai share a bit about Mount Kailash, and then we'll have to open it up to the audience because it's getting late here, and we would like to actually get into some question and answers also. But if Abhimanyu and Kai want to share a bit about the Mount Kailash program, that would be great.
Go ahead. Abhimanyu, you have to turn on your audio.
Yeah.
Hello?
Yes.
Yeah, you can hear me.
I should just say, Abhimanyu worked very closely with me on this, as you could see, on the Kailash Project, and he went on an expedition basically up from Nepal up to Kailas in, what was it, 2016? So, please.
So, firstly, sorry?
I used a number of your pictures on the pilgrimage routes, so I want to credit you.
Yeah, no, firstly, it's my privilege to be sharing this stage with stalwarts like Dr. Edwin Bernbaum, Dr. Purohit, and Dr. P.P. Thani. And I'll briefly, very briefly, just talk a little bit about the Kailash project and why this area was sought to be conserved as a World Heritage Site. I mean, I just saw the question of one of the people in the audience, and they asked that communities have been preserving sacred natural sites and the sacred mountains from generations. Then what is the whole point of actually conserving them as a protected area or as a World Heritage Site? So the thing is that these days, all these territories, whether it is the Kailash Manasarovar area or it is the routes to Mount Kailash through the south, they are increasingly becoming densely populated, whether it be in western Tibet or it be in northeastern Uttarakhand in the Pithoragarh district through which the Indian route to Kailash passes, or it be far western Nepal. In case there are not some concrete legal processes in place in order to protect these natural landscapes in whatever form they come, whether it be as a World Heritage Site or as some kind of a protected area, it is quite likely that in some point of time, these places which have for generations been protected as by custom or by belief, they shall be overtaken by activities such as road building or for extraction of natural resources and so on. And as for my own experience of working with the Dr. Edwin Bernbaum, we did some work together in the Indian and Nepali parts of the landscape that Dr. Bernbaum was talking, the transboundary Kailash sacred landscape, which spreads over far western Tibet, northeastern Uttarakhand, and western Nepal. And in 2016, I did an expedition. We walked through 4 valleys in the western Nepali district of Humla, and we walked into Tibet, and then we people did the parikrama of Mount Kailash, of Lake Manasarovar, and also went to a site further in western Tibet called Tirthpuri. And from there, we walked all the way back into Nepal, and I co-authored a book on that. And that book was actually a bid in order to make the world at large aware of what the transboundary linkages are in this region. For example, so there are these communities living in western Nepal and in Uttarakhand and in western Tibet. What is very well known is the holiness of Mount Kailash and Lake Manasarovar, but what is not so well known to a general audience is the fact that the communities living in this area across the border, whether it be in Uttarakhand or it be in western Nepal, also have had very long historic and cultural and religious linkages with their Tibetan counterparts living in western Tibet, including also a worshipful attitude towards the sacred landscapes lying across the border, whether it be for Nepali people living on the south of the Himalayas towards Kailash Mansarovar, or towards towards site in India for Nepali people, or for people in India who are living in Pithoragarh district in Uttarakhand, for having a worshipful attitude towards not just Kailash Mansarovar, but also towards site in Nepal. So it's a very densely interwoven landscape of sanctity. And international borders are something which have come about only in the last 100 years or so. They have become very strong. In the past, people were much more freely interacting across borders and all. So the whole point of the Kailash Sacred Landscape Project was to use those historic links, those religious links, those cultural links in order to improve transboundary cooperation and harmony in a region which otherwise is marked by geopolitical tensions and rivalries. So I think I shall put a stop at that and let Dr. Kai take from this point on.
Kai, are you with us?
Yes. After all those wonderful presentations, and thank you, Edwin. That was really a wonderful presentation. I really liked your 10 criteria for evaluating these sites. And so I'm just a few points. I just wanted to mention that I'm president of ECOMOS Nepal, so I'm looking at things from the cultural point of view. And I just also wanted to mention that Mount Kailash is already on the World Heritage List. We have the Kailash hillock just north of the Pashupatinath temple in Kathmandu, and which is part of the Kathmandu Valley World Heritage Site. So one can see that Mount Kailash symbolically is found in many different places. And I think we have to understand Mount Kailash again in the sense of this Mount Meru. It's more than just a mountain. It's got cultural, religious significance, which really spreads throughout, well, at least the subcontinent, if not further. What I just wanted to say, personally, I was involved with this World Heritage nomination process when I was invited to Dehradun in 2016 to the Wildlife Institute of India. There was a workshop there, and I was supposed to look into sort of the management aspect. Now, management at such a sort of a large area, in any case, whether we just take corridors or we take a larger area, really links to governance. And if we look at the governance systems in our three countries of India, Nepal, and China, trying to bring these together into one management system was already something very challenging just to even get started. I put down some notes and I actually started working on that, but it never really moved on into the discussion. However, I was asked to write an article for the magazine called Context. It's out of Delhi. And they asked me to write about Mount Kailash in the, how we see it from the perspective of Nepal, which was interesting because it's sort of not within our boundaries. And it's sort of out of our grasp, but still we have Mount Kailash is everywhere. Everyone understands it, believes it. It's in all our paintings, and religious the significance is found everywhere. So it was really interesting that this sort of link is there, but the actual mountain is sort of across the border, which was sort of an interesting study to do. What I actually wanted to quickly get to is that I was on the team that evaluated the Kanchenjunga National Park nomination. I went on mission in 2015 with Tilman Yeager of IUCN. Edwin, you might know him. And the interesting part of this sort of understanding of this Kanchenjunga National Park was that it was initially started as purely a natural site. So it was going to be nominated as a natural World Heritage Site. But then the communities came in and said, no, this is not a natural site. It's a cultural site as well. And for us, the mountain and that whole landscape has cultural value. So midway through this process of preparing the nomination, they had to add on the cultural component, which then I had to evaluate. Now, it was a bit of an awkward situation because the natural part of the nomination was very well prepared, And you could clearly see that the cultural aspect was sort of an add-on, where you had little comments of saying, yeah, it's religious, you know, it's a sacred landscape. And even with the criteria, we had a bit of an issue with, you know, how these values are actually linked, whether there were any tangible links or whether it really was this sort of a belief system, that this whole intangible aspect was the only link. However, I tried to support the nomination as far as possible, and it was inscribed in 2016. So I think that whole experience with Kanchenjunga National Park might be something that needs to be looked at when trying to discuss the Kailash sacred landscape as a World Heritage Site. I think it's complicated. It's always good. The process is always good. One learns things, but whether that will ever really become a World Heritage Site, well, it will need a lot of luck and a lot of hard work. So I think I'll just stick to that. And I have lots and lots of other notes, but I think I've spoken enough. Thank you.
Manisha, let me just comment. You raise a very interesting point. I think Kailas would need to be nominated primarily as a cultural site. And what's interesting is it's a cultural site because its natural features in and of themselves have cultural value without man-made structures on them. And I didn't emphasize it in my talk, but every feature, as you go in the Kora, and many features, natural features, whether or not they have shrines or temples on them. For example, there's a rock formation you pass, which is viewed by Hindus as Hanuman, invoking Shiva on the summit. And you know, the area is just full of that kind of thing. And it's the cultural values that make Kailas much more distinctive than simply its natural values. So I'm glad you brought up the cultural side, and ICOMOS obviously would be very deeply involved in any nomination.
I have a few things to say before we open it up, and before Professor Purohit leaves. I think it's getting late for him, but if you can just stay with us a few more minutes, Professor Purohit. Few of the thoughts that occurred to me when all of you were speaking. So one is the question that came to my mind is we are talking about three groups of people that are quote unquote using this landscape. So there are the local communities, the people who actually live there, and then there are the pilgrims who are coming from other places, and the value of the landscape to the people who live there in terms of their access to natural resources and also their spiritual beliefs is different from the values that the pilgrims hold, maybe who are coming from a long ways away. And then you also have the army. And so what occurred to me was that, you know, when you start a plantation program like Badrinath, you know, there are three groups of people, and what, you know, the way in which they relate to each other, the way in which they, you know, is there conflict between them? Who are we asking to be the main proponents of this replantation? Who are we asking to take responsibility for this landscape, right? Because normally when we speak about community conservation, we're talking about communities that live in the landscape, whereas here a lot of the damage is by people who are visiting the landscape, not so much maybe by the people who actually live there. So this was my first thought. The second thing is about the idea of pilgrimage, you know, I mean, and this is something that has come to me even for other pilgrimage spots, many of which are in forested areas, many of which are on hills in the rest of India. But this idea of going on pilgrimage as a way to take time out to really reconnect with the land, to, you know, understand maybe and observe the ecology of the place and experience the sanctity of that landscape, that I guess was the basis of going on pilgrimage, which now, of course, you know, the whole idea of just zipping in and zipping out and then it's done, you know, that idea of pilgrimage itself is changing. And so then with those changing values, how does that affect the way we try to conserve the place? And then the third question was about the carrying capacity of any such pilgrimage spot. And when I was with CSVPA for some years, Ed, I came across this film made about a mountain that was held dear to the Native Americans. And they actually spoke about when they held a mountain sacred, it was off limits, right? People were not allowed to go there. They were not allowed to climb that mountain. And that whole way of protecting a mountain because you considered it sacred and not interfering with it, not intervening with it, that seems to be a very different way of holding it sacred as opposed to everyone rushing to that spot. So this is also a difference in the way sanctity is perceived and the kind of behavior it results in. So these were the three thoughts I had. If any of you can comment, that would be great. And then after that, we have several very interesting questions and also interesting people in the audience that I would love for you to meet. Yeah.
So Manisha,
I will like to respond to your first question.
Yes, sir.
And then after that, I'll leave. I cannot. You see, number one,
Okay.
it is location specific. The management and the operation part will vary from place to place. As far as Badriban, Kedarnath, Badrinath, all in Uttaranchal is concerned, it's a priest who should be looked into for execution of such programs, and the temple committees, which is wherein you have representation of the local people. We have the priest, we have the army people involved in it, and we have the government also involved in it. But the main chairman of that execution program should be the priest. This is what my feeling was, that but there's a Uttarakhand area, that's the program or strategy which will develop or work out as far as the first question is concerned.
I would agree with you, Professor Purohit, that it really does depend on the location and also the tradition,
Right.
which links to the third question that Manisha had, or point that she made, which is that yes, with American Indians, and I think she may be talking about Devil's Tower in Wyoming, where there's a certain time of the year where people are not allowed to climb, and other mountains, you know, the Indians feel that people should not climb them. However, for example, even in Buddhism, in, for example, Tibet and India, in that area, you don't climb a sacred mountain, you walk around it. You circumambulate it as you would a stupa or a temple. On the other hand, the Buddhists in China and Japan, the religious ritual is to climb the mountain and go to the summit. So it really depends on the tradition, and as you said, Professor Purohit, on the location.
Location. Thank you, Edwin. I have to go and meet somebody.
Thank you. It's wonderful seeing you.
It is a pleasure.
Thank you. Namaste,
And
Purohit.
also, thank you
so
very
much.
much. I'm sorry I have to miss others.
That's all.
Thank you very much, sir.
Yeah.
Just in connection with the community, just a quick comparison again to Kanchenjunga, where it's a national park. So legislation does not seem to allow human habitation within the national park, which was a bit of an issue. Some habitation inside the park were also removed. That was a big issue in connection with it becoming World Heritage. We are looking at how the forest could at least be used by the communities living around. The other discussion was, why wasn't it trans-boundary? Because on the Nepali side, we have the Kanchenjunga conservation area. One of the reasons was that on the Nepali side, the area is managed by the community, and it's not a national park. So there was a bit of an issue with communication, even between Nepal and India, to really work on a transboundary nomination. So these are the issues of where the community comes in. Very often it is linked also to legislation.
Yeah, Guy. I also want to hear your thoughts on this, the way in which our idea of pilgrimage is changing.
Maybe Abhimanyu, this is a opportunity for you to come in, because when I went to Kailas in '92, there was no paved road there. There were very few pilgrims going. The only pilgrims we saw when we went were Tibetan, although there were a few from India. But since then, things have changed with the road going in, and it's very different when you went in 2016. And you might
Sure.
use that as a way of addressing Manisha's question.
Sure. I thanks Ed for that cue. I would say that before kind of turning to the status of what the landscape is like right now, I would say that the traditional idea of why people go on a pilgrimage revolves a lot around how the pilgrimage is done. So, I mean, the difficulty, the arduousness of undertaking this pilgrimage to a remote site through mountains, exerting yourself physically, undertaking various difficulties, that itself is considered a process of purification. So it is as important as getting the final view of the sacred mountain or immersion into the sacred lake. And Manisha ji, you are completely right that with the modern forms of pilgrimage, in which it has become motorized and roads are going all the way to the mountains, that aspect of attaining merit through pilgrimage is completely sidestepped. Yeah. So now it indeed has become, in a way, you cannot really distinguish between tourism and pilgrimage so much anymore, because the way they both happen is very, very similar. And the kind, like in earlier times, you wouldn't really worry too much about pilgrimage despoiling the landscape, because people were going there on foot and it was a very small scale affair. But nowadays there are busloads of people going, there are hotels coming up, and there is a lot of money in it. So definitely there is a lot of greater human pressure in the environment. And that you can see, if I now come down to the Kailash sacred landscape, then each of the three countries involved presents a different picture. As you would have heard, in May 2020, the government of India inaugurated a road that now goes from the Indian town low down in the Mahakali Valley called Dharchula. So they opened the road from Dharchula till the border pass of Lipu Lake, which lies in a territory that is contested between the governments of India and Nepal. Yeah, and it's been contested for a very long time. It's been contested for last 200 years, ever since the Treaty of Sigoli was passed, in which the borders of the two countries near that particular region, near Lipu Lake Pass, were left very vague. So, but on the Indian side, now there has been much more development than on the Nepali side of the landscape. In district Pithoragarh, so there are roads, there are big towns that have come up, like Pithoragarh town itself, then there is DD Hart, Dharchula, and there is electricity, there is telecommunications all the way up till I think the village of Garbyang or so on. On the Nepali side, places are still not that well developed and the infrastructure is not there. So even if Nepali people themselves want to go to the Nepali upper parts of the Nepali landscape, they often come into India, take the Indian road or the Indian walking route till recently, to go up till a village which is very close to the place where the borders of the three countries meet, near Lipu Lake Pass, and then cross back into Nepal. Yeah. And if you are thinking of Tibet itself, of China, then as Dr. Dhyani might have also observed as he went to the Kailash landscape in 2017, the infrastructure development has been very intense. I mean, there is a 4-lane highway that goes parallel to the border with India and Nepal, called the National Highway 200 and G219, and it connects both the Nepali route to the Lhasa, and from Lhasa the road goes all the way to a place called Taklakot, which is basically the place from where the Kailash Manasarovar Yatra is started. And then the road continues till the base of the Kailash mountain, and while going from south to north, till Darchen, you kind of come across the lake of Manasarovar on one side and Rakshastal on the other. You pass right through the center and then you reach Darchen. And nearby there is also an airport built by the Chinese in that area, and there are plenty of hotels to stay in that area now also, because the Chinese government really wants to develop this region into a popular tourist destination. They consider it to be the most economically productive use of this landscape. So even though some people might believe that this is first and foremost a sacred landscape, how the governments tend to view these particular landscapes under their jurisdiction can be significantly different. And these days it is more and more about what kind of economic returns could be there from the landscape, whether it is through tourism or through mining or through some kind of construction activity or so on. That's about it.
Great, thank you, Abhimanyu. I think if, with your permission, may I now open it up to the audience? We're almost reaching the end, but I would like to give them a few minutes to interact with all of you. We have quite a few people with us still. And I'd like to start by inviting two people, Meera Bendur from Bangalore, if she's still with us. Meera is a scholar, and she's written a book called Nature in Hindu Philosophy. And so it would be nice to hear from her. Meera, are you still with us?
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah,
you can hear me, right? Yeah, thank you so much. That was so wonderful, because I was a part of I was invited as a consultant for Kailash Manasarovar Yatra. Of course, I was going around with a politician. So it was from the GB Pant Institute only, some smaller division where we were doing some conservation workshops. So my question is this, because I've been working on sacred landscapes, and it is very true what you said, that the natural landscapes are very, very culturally across countries. They are worshipped across countries. And so it does make for a good cultural emphasis for conservation. But what I found was when I was doing my conceptual studies on what actually these landscapes mean for the people, I realized that in the Hindu mainstream religion, the landscape is actually extraterrestrial. That means it doesn't belong to the earth. So they have this whole idea that these landscapes are immutable. So I had this problem when I was talking to people I lived in the Himalayas for 7 years in the Govind Pashuvihar as a sadhvi. So I'm coming from that experience. So as to tell people not to bathe in the Ganges, they used to say Ganges is not earthly water. It cannot be polluted. So there's this whole sacred immutability. That is one problem. The second is that, so therefore Indians, at least in the Hindu mainstream religion, I think the idea of using the sacred is very common. And so how do you overcome the idea of, when I plant a tulsi plant, I do not touch it because it's sacred. I literally have to pluck the leaves and use it's a use versus fallow kind of things. I think there are papers on it. And so what also has happened is, I think as Abhimanyu pointed out earlier, the pilgrimage was very tough. And I remember when I went to my first pilgrimage, it was just 4 months in the year when the temple was open. Now, we have winter landscape. We have a winter snow ski resort or something coming up there. So people are traveling all the time. So that carrying capacity that Manisha spoke of, there's a kind of conflict between what a pilgrimage is itself. And in this kind of a dialogue, is it safer to rely on conservation, natural conservation, and legal ideas rather than just look for the sacred? Is it time we just kept the sacred on as cultural interest, but actually worked more on tougher laws? I mean, I'm wondering, because I've worked in this field for so long, I'm kind of tired of convincing people that they have to follow the correct sacred, because sort of do as you please kind of Hinduism going on there. Yeah. Thank you. I can see Kai smiling. He knows what I'm talking about. Yeah. Yeah, Manisha? Yeah, I'm done. Manisha, you're muted.
Sorry, Ed, Abhimanyu, whoever would like to respond, Dr. Dhyani.
Yeah, can I just slip in one more? I went to during this yatra, we were traveling with people on the Indian side. I didn't have the help to go up to the yatra. We were traveling with a politician. I don't remember who. We went to this incredible cave temple in the Himalayas, and he suggested that this is so difficult to go inside. Let's put a lift. So, लिफ्ट डाल देते हैं, बहुत अच्छा होगा, आराम से बड़े-बड़े लोग भी जा सकते हैं अंदर. ये गुफा में क्यों प्रवेश? Like, why do you crawl through this space? Because it's one of the only cave temples in India where you have to kind of crawl through that space. Yeah, Patal Bhairav. That's where I go to the lift down there.
So in one line, Meera, can you just, your question is in one line?
So the question is, what do you do in case of conflicts like this between the sacred, where the sacred is not enough for conservation? Yeah, so that's the question. Yeah.
Well, let me just say a few words and then hand it over to people who've been working more closely in the field. I mean, it's a very important question you bring up, but it's not an either-or proposition. The question is, how can you integrate the two? And as Abhimanyu and I think Kai have pointed out, you know, in the past, there were basically sacred sites and local traditions were able to protect things, but now they're being overwhelmed by modernity. So the question is, how do you sort of adapt them to the current situation and integrate the cultural and spiritual side along with the natural conservation? And I think the key there, I think that's a very important key to dealing with this problem. But I agree with you, it's very difficult. One of the reasons I think a World Heritage nomination of this area would be helpful is that at least in order to maintain your World Heritage status, you've got to preserve the outstanding universal value, which means it would put some brakes on the tendency to develop these places as purely tourist sites and to emphasize the cultural side, and also through educational programs, for example, like what we're doing with national parks here in the United States, is basically introduce people and sort of remotivate them to do the kind of things that Abhimanyu was talking about, where pilgrimage is not just getting blessing at the place, but the actual transformation that takes place, and to encourage people to change the way in which they do it. I mean, obviously, that's not going to work with everyone, but it could have an effect. So with that sort of overview, let me hand it off to someone else.
Would Dr. Dhyani or Kai please want to say? I have a few things that I would like to respond to otherwise.
Well, I can give some points in respect to cultural heritage as sort of comparative examples. One, very clearly, I mean, in this part of the world, you know, all the statues and anything that's worshipped has to be touched and fed and, you know, covered, and this constant, and especially after the earthquake here in Kathmandu, we had the big question of, you know, what do we do with, let's say, statues of deities that were damaged, and the belief is that we don't worship damaged statues, that they are replaced. And now there's a big discussion in connection with that. And very clearly we need to define where is the value, and you know, where is that value that is most important. I think we've gotten away from it being purely in the material object. We have understood that the value very often lies in the intangible, in the beliefs. And we have to adapt, and more or less the idea was, okay, if we replace one of these deities in one of the temples, possibly we can take the statue and put it in a museum. So now we have two different systems dealing with these objects in two different ways. The object in the temple, which is being venerated, and the object in the museum, which might be a bit of a foreign concept, but that can still be viewed. So I think this adaptation and really understanding where the values lie and finding solutions becomes very important. Thank you.
Abhimanyu?
Yeah, To what Dr. Kai just said right now, I would like to also add to ma'am, Dr. Bendur, that I completely can identify with your concern that the sacred is not enough in order to preserve natural sites. And it became very clear to me during my work with sacred natural sites in Uttarakhand and Western Nepal, because often the kinds of belief, the very kinds of belief due to which a site is preserved, often reflect the local social stratifications, the local hierarchies, which may not be very wholesome in some ways. For example, there are certain forests, or many forests actually, which are sacred to the higher castes. In them, women are often not allowed, and lower castes or Dalits are not allowed. And because these categories of people are considered, so to say, having a polluting influence upon the site. So in today's world, where we are concerned about bringing about greater equality and equity, maybe the form of conservation, the values with which we conserve, also have to reflect this greater awareness of the need to have more justice in conservation. Yeah? So these older forms of beliefs and all, in sometimes they just serve to reify the older forms of discrimination or hierarchy. So they cannot really be taken as sustainable ways to conserve natural sites, which have previously been conserved as sacred natural sites.
I would just add, a very interesting point was raised, particularly about the Ganges, that the water is considered so sacred that you can't pollute it. And that, of course, works against cleaning up the river. So just because a place is sacred doesn't mean that that's going to protect it. That's a very important thing. Another thing I was going to say was, when you talk about these conflicts and new views, I did a paper for a World Heritage Review with a scholar in Japan about Omine, which is part of a World Heritage Site. It's a sacred mountain in Japan, and it's off limits to women. But yet it's a World Heritage Site, which is supposed to be of importance to everyone in the world. There's another site like this, Mount Athos. And so there's a lot of controversy around whether such sites should keep women out. And there are religious reasons for doing that, but then things have to change. So the point is, often we tend to look at religious traditions as being very fixed, but they change over time. So the question is, how can things adapt to deal with the world today? And I think that's a key to what what we're trying to do.
But Ed, Gopika has an interesting question here. She feels, and I mean, it'd be nice if she can talk to you, but she feels like, giving a World Heritage status is actually going to not desecrate, but bring so much attention, more attention to the site. And then, the serenity of the place goes. Gopika, would you like to speak? Are you still with us, Gopika?
Let me address that question quickly, because that is a very, very important question, and Kai can also deal with that as well, since he's worked even more with World Heritage Sites. The problem, for example, with Kailas, as Abhimanyu has indicated, is that the Chinese are really developing it in a big way. There's a 4-lane highway, there are many hotels, and so this is going to happen. And the hope would be that with World Heritage status, there would be basically restrictions on overdevelopment, and it would put a brake on that kind of thing. That has to be weighed against, of course, the increase in tourism because of the stature of the World Heritage Site. So it's a matter of balancing the two, and that's why the management plans that Kai is very familiar with are extremely important.
We can take one more question from Edwin Barrow, who's here from Kenya. Edmund, you had a question?
Yes, Edwin, thank you very much indeed for a lovely presentation. Fascinating. I'll quickly ask a question, but I'll frame it in the context that I live in Kenya, and there's a sacred mountain called Mount Kenya here. And it has a big national park on the upper reaches of the mountain and a national forest reserve on the lower reach. Rural people are not allowed into that park without paying or into the forest, yet there are many sacred trees and sacred groves in those areas. The question is, how do we make sure the custodians of these sacred sites, be it a sacred mountain or a sacred grove, are not alienated by the processes of conservation, be it a national park or be it a forest reserve? Because at present, many sacred sites are being alienated from the custodians and their people who hold them sacred. Thank you.
I think that's an extremely important question you raise. And that's true. I mean, one of the problems with national parks is there's a so-called Yellowstone model, which is the original model for national parks. And there what happened was all the American Indians were removed from the park. And that created, even more severe problems. And of course, when national parks first came into Nepal, there was a national park in Western Nepal where everybody was moved down to the Terai and they just didn't know how to live in the lowlands. And it basically alienated people from the national park system. They wanted to have nothing to do with it. But what's happening is the idea that there are national parks, especially in Europe and also now in Nepal and other places, where the idea is that people can live within the park and make use of that. As far as national parks go, for example, I worked with a number of parks, and one park was Hawaii Volcanoes National Park, where Native Hawaiians played a major role in park staff. And basically, rather than sticking to the strict conservation protocols about, people shouldn't go in and do things, the park was very loose about it and sort of let, they encouraged and helped Native Hawaiians to use the sacred sites rather than keeping them away from them. In Great Smoky Mountains, there was a question, for example, we worked there where ginseng, for example, was being collected, and it was being collected as a sacred substance for, basically traditional uses. The problem was when people would go in there and start to collect too much of it to sell, for example, in China, where it could, draw a very high price, then you've got to figure out how you do it. So yes, the sacred sites are observed, people can go in and use them, but use them in a traditional manner rather than in an extractive manner.
There's one more person who really, I think would be great to have him speak, Mr. B.S. Bonal, retired, was a director in Manas and Kaziranga. Would you like to ask your question, Bonalji? Okay, I think there may be something, the problem with Vijay Anand. Would you like to say something?
Manisha, would you please request them to unmute themselves? I think now they can.
Am I audible?
Yes, yes, yes.
Bonal,
Yes, Bonalji.
am I audible
Yes, yes.
now? Okay. Okay. Right now I am in Dharchula. That is from the Kailash landscape self. By the way, here network is not good, so anytime it may go off. So therefore, I thought that I should talk. As Manisha mentioned, I walked in the World Heritage Site in Kaziranga National Park and Manas, and had been as a ADG Wildlife and Member Secretary NTC in Government of India. After retirement, I'm here in Kailash landscape in Dharchula, which is the gateway for Kailash Manasarovar Yatra. By the way, in 2005, I had gone to Kailash Manasarovar Yatra as a liaison officer, taking about 31 number of pilgrims. In fact, you see, the Government of India organizes this yatra very, very under the stringent rules. They take every year only 16 groups, having the number of pilgrims around 30 to 40, not more than that. So therefore, the Manisha's question of carrying capacity to the yatra for Kailash Manasarovar, it answers that the Government of India really maintains as per the carrying capacity. But unfortunately now, because that was the only route from Lipu Lake via Dharsula, Garbyang, Gunji, and Lipu Lake to Taklakot. But now there are a number of routes open through the Nepal, and from Kathmandu they take the pilgrims by helicopter, by road, and all. In fact, that is not exactly as pilgrims, rather than it is tourism, and naturally, and definitely, I personally feel that tourism is double-edged sword. One way, you say, we have to take the tourists with the motive to make aware the people about nature, natural conservation, things like that. But at the same time, when the development takes place in other round, like Dr. Edwin already mentioned that in the China side, a lot of development has taken place. In 2005, there was not much of development in China side. After discussions, a lot, some improvement took place. But now, as you mentioned, that hotels and things like that are coming up. So definitely, it's a little. We have to think for that. My concern and question is, you see, the transboundary World Heritage Site, which comprising of China, Nepal, and India, was in the move. It was in the move, but we just heard that I think that I should not say fizzled out, but it has not taken off in the proper way. Because in the meantime, the China government has separately moved, and the site, the Kailash site, has been already nominated as a World Heritage Site for the China part. So therefore, the India has also moved for this Kailash, secret Kailash route. Not because the Kailash falls into the Tibetan territory. Therefore, from Indian side, the proposal is for the route. So therefore, there has been a move from the wildlife, through the Wildlife Institute of India, through the nodal agencies to UNESCO. For that matter, the Wildlife Institute of India has entrusted a part of work for the people, the socio-culture aspect of the landscape. And by the way, I am the president of Rang Kalyan Sanstha. The people, the indigenous people of this landscape is called Rang. And we all people from this landscape having one civil society called Rang Kalyan Sanstha, who is looking after for the development and upliftment of the society. Our headquarters is based in Dehradun. So we have been interested for that particular aspect of the report of the proposed World Heritage Site, which is supposed to be a mixed heritage site. So I don't know, that is under preparation, but I just wanted to know its status as on today, whether the transboundary land, World Heritage Site as such for 3 countries is on way, and if it is so, then if it is not, then what is the status of the present proposal of the government of India for Kailash route, the World Heritage Site as a mixed heritage site for cultural and natural. So these are my 2 questions. I would like to know from the Edwin and Abhimanyu. And I just wanted to inform, so far as Abhimanyu told about the route from Dharsula to Lipu Lake. Yeah, the route has been there since long. So when the Kailash Yatra was there since 1991, this route had been there. So on the same existing route, only the new road is built, and that has been just inaugurated, of course. But the people over here, they would, in fact, even the pilgrims would love to go on foot. That gives a real, feeling of, going to the sacred place like, Kailash and Manasarovar. Anyway, I would just like to know about the status of these 2 proposed sites as a transboundary World Heritage Site and the Kailash route that is proposed by the Government of India through Wildlife Institute of India. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to be with you all people and know something about that. And a very good evening to Dr. Dhyani also. And over to you, please.
Oh, no,
I
yeah,
would like to just.
yeah. We're running out of time, unfortunately. So I'm going to have to request that people keep their responses a little short. We're losing our attendant and our participants also. So can we just very briefly answer him and then call it a day?
I'll make a very brief answer. In 2016, we met with officials in all three countries, and there was a great deal of interest in the transboundary site. Since then, there were other officials we didn't talk to in China and Tibet who wanted to nominate Kailas by itself without the transboundary. As you mentioned, India went ahead with its portion. So right now, the overall transboundary nomination or proposal is kind of dead, but I think it needs to be revived in the future. Now, I looked at the UNESCO list, and basically a site has to be put on the tentative list for a year before the actual nomination process can begin. And the last time I looked, quite recently at UNESCO, Kailas was not on the Chinese tentative list. So they haven't even put it on the tentative list as far as I know. So that means it hasn't been moved up in terms of its nomination. The Indian government WWF did put the Indian portion on the tentative list, but now it's been taken off of the tentative list because of, apparently because of a border dispute with Nepal, which we don't want to go into. But Abhimanyu is more familiar with what's been going on about that, and perhaps Kai, two of you could add a bit more in answer to his question.
Okay. So I'll just say very briefly, as for the Chinese side, you have already said, Ed. For the Indian side, the Indian portion of the Kailash sacred landscape was indeed nominated. It was put on the tentative list last year in last May, I think, May 2019. But this year, due to the dispute over the Lipu Lake Limpiadhura stretch up in the north, it was taken away from the tentative list. And that's why I hear that now the government of India is pushing for this routes to Kailash nomination. It's kind of old wine in a new bottle. What they say, yeah, like that kind of thing. No? And in Nepal, so far as I am aware, maybe Dr. Kai will be able to tell better. The Nepali government so far seems to have not pushed it, although there has been some interest in particular sites along the Nepali routes to Kailash, such as those in the Limi Valley, such as the Halji Gumba and so on and so forth. That's it.
Thank you.
Thank
you. And
I think
there was no dispute at all, but somehow it has cropped up.
Yeah, I think what we can do for those of you who are interested, we can share some email addresses, and especially on more technical issues, maybe you can connect to the panelists directly. Kai, I'm going to cut you short. I'm sorry, but I do need to wrap up now. Thank you, everyone, for an amazing session. Very educational, very enlightening. Thank you so much, Dr. Edwin. It's been really wonderful. Of course, there's still many, many questions. And I'm hoping that at another point we can come back to that. Thank you to all the panelists, Dr. Dhyani, Kai, Abhimanyu, and to all of you here in India who are still with us. It's almost 10 o'clock. May I very quickly just end here by sharing a little bit about the Revive series and introducing the next speaker who's going to be with us next Sunday. Niranjan, please can you share the... Yeah, I want to say that we are, of course, keeping the Revive sessions free. The speakers are all giving their time for free, and there's an entire team that is managing all the sessions for us, but we would appreciate some help. So if you have enjoyed this session and you are looking forward to the others, please save this on your screen and then send us some contributions. We would be more than happy to have them. We also next week, Niranjan, please can you share this slide? Next week we have with us Kanchi Kohli, a very dear friend, a brilliant woman. She's based out of Delhi. She's a senior researcher with the Center for Policy Research. And she is going to be speaking to us specifically about environment regulation in India and some of the dilutions that are coming about in legislation and policy, specifically during the lockdown. So this is going to be a very interesting talk, and I do hope that you can join us again next Sunday. And with that, here we are. These are our contact details if you'd like to contact us. Please do stay connected. Thank you very, very much, all of you. Again, thank you, Edwin and Diane, for joining us. Forgive me for those who I could not include in the question and answer, but there will be other opportunities. With that, I wish you a very, very good night, and warm regards to all of you. Thank you once again.